My name is Victor Chandler. I was born in Fargo, North Dakota, in a house that from the outside, everyone thought was perfect. Our home sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees that blazed red every autumn and lawns meticulously trimmed. My father, Dennis Chandler, was a renowned heart surgeon respected by the entire town. He earned the kind of money that as a child I couldn't even begin to comprehend. My mother, Marcia Bloom, was an elementary school teacher, gentle and always smiling, though her eyes sometimes held an unspoken sadness. I once thought our family was a perfect picture, until it shattered like a pane of glass hurled to the floor. I still vividly remember the day everything changed. I was 8 years old, small and innocent, sitting on the wooden stairs in our sprawling house. My mother stood in the hallway clutching an old suitcase, her eyes red but trying to hold on to a facade of strength. My father stood a few steps away, silent, his face cold as if he had nothing left to say. And then, Gloria appeared, a woman a decade younger than my mother with shimmering blonde hair and a smile sharp as a knife. She walked into the house as if it were already her domain and spoke venomous words no child like me should have heard. "Marcia, you should know your place," Gloria said, her voice sweet but dripping with mockery. "What can an elementary school teacher do for a man like Dennis? He needs a woman of his caliber." I saw my mother's grip tighten on the suitcase handle, but she didn't respond. She just looked at my father as if waiting for him to say something, to do something to defend her. But he stood there, his gaze empty, not a single word in her defense. I felt my heart being squeezed. I wanted to run to her, to hug her, to scream at Gloria, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. My mother turned to me, gave a sad smile, and said, "Victor, be good. I'll be back soon." Then she walked out the door, her small figure disappearing behind the cold iron gate. From that day on, my life was never the same. My father won custody of me because he had money, status, and a lawyer who knew how to tilt everything in his favor. My mother moved to live with my grandparents in a small suburban town a few hours' drive from Fargo. I was left in the large house that had once been a home, but was now just an empty shell. Gloria quickly became the new Mrs. Chandler. My father married her less than a year after the divorce. They had 2 children together, Diego, a loud boy spoiled by his mother, and Jenna, a pretty girl who quickly learned to look at me with the same contempt as her mother. I became an outsider in my own home. My father, though he tried to make up for it with expensive gifts or rare outings, grew increasingly distant. He was consumed by his work, with surgeries that stretched into the early hours, and by his new family. I felt like I was living in a play I hadn't been invited to join. Gloria never hit me or yelled at me in front of my father, but her coldness hurt more than any words could. She always found ways to make me feel like I didn't belong. "Victor, Marcia's son, right?" she would say, emphasizing my mother's name as if it were a stain. She lavished attention on Diego and Jenna, buying them the latest toys, taking them on vacations to places I only saw in photos. Meanwhile, I was assigned chores, cleaning rooms, washing dishes, even scrubbing the garage, as if I were a servant rather than my father's son. I grew up with a sense of abandonment, despite living in a house filled with comforts. Family dinners were the moments I dreaded most. My father sat at the head of the table, Gloria beside him, while Diego and Jenna chattered away. I stayed silent, picking at the cold meat on my plate, trying to ignore Gloria's glances. Once I overheard her whisper to my father, "He's nothing like you, Dennis. It's like he's all Marcia." My father only mumbled in response, but I felt the distance between us growing, like a crack that couldn't be mended. My relationship with my father faded into something formal, marked by respect and duty. I respected him because he was a skilled doctor, admired by his patients and colleagues, but I no longer felt his love. On the rare occasions he asked about my studies or my life, I answered briefly, unwilling to open up. I was afraid that if I let him into my world, I'd only get hurt again. When I turned 18, I started visiting my mother and grandparents more often. The town where my mother lived was small and simple, but it was where I found the warmth I had lost long ago. My grandparents welcomed me with tight hugs and simple love-filled meals. My mother, though still carrying the pain of the past, always tried to make me smile. She told me stories about her childhood, her days as a teacher, and how she always believed I would achieve something great. Those visits with my mother were the only light in my dark years. I would sit with her in the small garden behind her house, listening as she talked about the flowers she grew and how she learned to move forward after losing the family she once cherished. Once I asked her, "Do you hate Dad?" She looked at me, her eyes gentle but resolute, and said, "Hate only hurts us more, Victor. I just want you to live well, to be true to yourself." My mother encouraged me to stay in Fargo, to keep studying and fight for what was rightfully mine. "You're your father's son," she said firmly. "You have a right to that house, to his legacy. Don't let Gloria or anyone take what's yours." Her words were like a small flame, igniting a determination in me I hadn't known I had. I began to focus on my studies, preparing for college with all my strength. I wanted to prove that I wasn't just Marcia's son. I was Victor Chandler, and I wouldn't let my past define my future. But deep down, I still carried the wounds of my childhood. Every time I returned to the house in Fargo, I felt like an unwelcome guest. Diego and Jenna grew up, becoming more like their mother with their fake smiles and subtle jabs. Gloria never stopped trying to solidify her place in the family, as if I were a threat she needed to eliminate. I knew she was waiting for the day I'd leave so she and her children could claim everything. I lived on the edge of two worlds, the coldness of the house I called home and the warmth of my mother and grandparents. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I had to keep fighting, not just for myself, but for my mother, for what she had sacrificed, and for the boy who once watched his mother be humiliated and could do nothing about it. Those years shaped me, making me stronger, but also deeply scarred. I learned to hide my emotions, to smile even when my heart was bleeding. And I promised myself that one day I would find my place, not just in that house, but in my own life. 2 years passed, and I turned 20, carrying old scars and a flicker of new hope. I was in my second year of college, majoring in engineering, trying to build a future I could be proud of. I still traveled between Fargo and my mother's town, searching for balance between two worlds. My father, though still distant, occasionally called to check on my studies, his voice tinged with something like regret. But I no longer held out much hope. I had grown used to standing on my own. Then one night, everything changed forever. I was in my dorm studying for midterms when my phone rang. It was Gloria's number. I frowned, wondering why she was calling at this hour. When I answered, her voice trembled, lacking its usual arrogance. "Victor, your father is gone." I froze, the phone slipping from my hand and hitting the desk with a dull thud. I don't remember what I said, only that I quietly hung up, sank into my chair, and felt the world collapsing around me. My father, the man I both respected and resented, was gone. A late-night emergency surgery, a critical patient, and his own heart couldn't withstand the strain. He collapsed in the operating room, and despite his colleagues' best efforts, they couldn't save him. I returned to Fargo the next morning, my heart heavy. The house I once called home was now steeped in the atmosphere of a funeral. Gloria, Diego, and Jenna, dressed in black, greeted guests, but I could see the pretense in their every tear. The house was filled with visitors, doctors, former patients, neighbors, all speaking of my father with admiration. A brilliant surgeon, they said, a remarkable man. But to me, he was a father I never truly understood. The funeral was quiet, but what haunted me most was Gloria's gaze. She looked at me not with sympathy, but with a hint of triumph. I didn't understand why until the reading of the will a few days later. I sat in the lawyer's office, a stifling room with dark wooden bookshelves and the smell of old paper. Gloria, Diego, and Jenna were there, dressed impeccably, but the tension in the air was palpable. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, began reading my father's will. I wasn't expecting much. I was used to being sidelined. But when he announced that the house in Fargo, my father's largest asset, was left entirely to Gloria, my heart stopped. Gloria smiled, a subtle but undeniable smirk of satisfaction. Diego and Jenna exchanged glances, their eyes gleaming with delight. I sat there, numb. The house, the place that held my childhood memories, painful and joyful alike, now belonged to the woman who had torn my family apart. I wasn't surprised, but the pain cut like a knife. Even in death, my father had chosen Gloria's side. I left the lawyer's office without a word, walking through the frigid Fargo streets, my breath turning to mist in the November air. I wondered what I had left. Cold childhood memories, a distant father, and now a legacy I had no part in. I felt like I had lost everything, like I had never truly belonged in this place. That night I called my mother. When I heard her voice, I broke down for the first time since my father's death. "Mom, Dad left everything to Gloria," I said, my voice choking. "I have nothing left." She was silent for a moment, then said gently but firmly, "Victor, you still have me, your grandparents, and yourself. Those are the things that matter most. Don't let a will define your worth." My mother's words comforted me, but the pain didn't fade. I returned to school trying to focus on my studies, but every night I dreamed of the house in Fargo, my mother's departing figure, and Gloria's triumphant smile. I wondered if my father had ever truly loved me, or if I was just a responsibility he had to bear. I didn't know that just 2 months later, a secret from my father would change everything. My 20th birthday arrived on a freezing winter day, with snow blanketing the roads leading to the small town where my mother and grandparents lived. I chose to celebrate there, not in Fargo, where memories of my father and Gloria's coldness still clung to me like a shadow. My grandparents' small house, with its crackling fireplace and the smell of freshly baked cookies, was the only place I felt truly loved, truly myself. My mother had prepared a simple but warm celebration, a homemade chocolate cake, a few dishes she knew I loved, and genuine smiles from my grandparents. My grandfather, with his white hair and warm, deep voice, told stories of his youth, deliberately trying to make me laugh. My grandmother held my hand, her kind eyes seeming to say that everything would be all right. My mother, as always, didn't dwell on my pain, but she was there, quietly shielding me, quietly loving me. As I blew out the candles, everyone clapped, but I noticed a fleeting sadness in their eyes. They knew I had just lost my father, knew I had been excluded from his inheritance, and knew I was trying to hide the wounds in my heart. "Victor, you're so strong," my grandmother said, her voice trembling. "Your father, he must be proud of you." I smiled, but inside I wasn't sure I could believe that. My father had left the house to Gloria, leaving me with nothing. Proud? I didn't think he had ever truly seen me. Then in the middle of the party, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I frowned, tempted to ignore it, but a strange intuition made me pick up. "Hello, this is Victor Chandler," I said, stepping out onto the porch to escape the laughter inside. A man's voice came through, polite but serious. "Hello, Victor. I'm Robert Klein, your father's lawyer, Dennis Chandler. I need to meet with you urgently alone at my office in Fargo. Can you arrange to come tomorrow?" I froze, feeling a jolt run through my body. My father's lawyer? A private meeting? I had thought everything related to the will was settled, that I had nothing left to receive but painful memories. "Yes, I'll be there," I replied, my voice slightly shaky. After hanging up, I stood under the starry sky, my heart pounding. What was waiting for me? Why now? The next morning I drove to Fargo, my mind swirling with 100 questions. Mr. Klein's office was in the heart of the city, a modern glass building that contrasted sharply with the heavy feeling in my chest. When I walked in, Mr. Klein stood to shake my hand, his expression serious but not cold. "Thank you for coming, Victor," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I have some important information to share, and this is something your father wanted kept secret until you turned 20. I sat down, feeling the air in the room grow thick. Mr. Klein opened a small wooden box on his desk, pulling out a stack of documents in a cream-colored envelope, carefully sealed. "Your father, Dennis, set up a secret trust fund for you," he began, his voice steady but weighty. "The fund is worth $2 million, and you are officially eligible to access it today on your 20th birthday." I felt the blood in my veins stop. $2 million? I stared at Mr. Klein, searching for any sign that this was a joke, but his face remained unwavering. "Furthermore," he continued, "your father left you a beachfront villa in the Outer Banks, valued at approximately $950,000. Everything is in your name, managed discreetly to avoid any disputes." I was speechless, unable to utter a word. My father, the man I thought had turned his back on me, who left the family home to Gloria, had quietly arranged a massive inheritance for me? I didn't know what to feel, gratitude, anger, or simply confusion. Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why keep it a secret?" Mr. Klein slid the envelope across the desk. "This is your father's answer," he said. "He asked me to give it to you on this exact day." I took the envelope, my hands trembling as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, my father's handwriting clear and strong, yet with a slight tremble, as if he had written it in a moment of deep emotion. "Dear Victor, when you read this letter, I hope you're mature enough to understand what I'm about to say. I know I wasn't the best father. I let you get hurt, let you grow up in a house where you didn't feel you belonged. I'm sorry for that, for the times I stayed silent, for the times I didn't stand up for you and your mother. This trust fund and the villa are my attempt to make amends. I kept them secret because I didn't want you caught in disputes with Gloria or your siblings. I wanted you to have a fresh start, a future you could shape yourself. You are my son, and though I wasn't good at showing it, I've always been proud of you. Live well, Victor. Do what you believe is right, and forgive me if you can. Love." I read the letter over and over, tears silently falling onto the paper. For the first time in years, I felt a part of my father. Not the brilliant surgeon, not the distant husband, but a father who had tried in his own way to make up for his mistakes. I didn't know if I could fully forgive him, but I understood that he had thought of me, had planned for me, even when he couldn't say it out loud. I left Mr. Klein's office with a heart full of contradictions. Joy mingled with pain, gratitude blended with regret. I didn't tell anyone about the trust fund or the villa except for my mother and grandparents. When I returned to their town and sat in my mother's small garden recounting everything, she held my hand, her eyes glistening with tears. "Your father loved you, Victor," she said. "He may not have known how to show it, but he loved you. Always." My grandfather patted my shoulder, his voice low and steady. "Now you have a chance to do what's right, not just for yourself, but for what your father left behind." I nodded, but inside I knew my journey wasn't over. Gloria, Diego, and Jenna were still there in the house I once called home, and I knew this secret would soon lead me to an inevitable confrontation. I returned to Fargo a few days after my birthday, carrying a heavy heart, but also a newfound determination. My father's letter remained in my coat pocket, a constant reminder that he had believed in me, that he had left me a chance to shape my own future. I had no intention of boasting about the trust fund or the beachfront villa. I just wanted to keep going, to study, and to find a way to turn what my father left me into something meaningful. But fate, as it often does, had a way of pulling me into situations I hadn't sought. One afternoon, as I stepped into the Fargo house to pick up some personal belongings, I overheard Gloria's voice from the living room. Her tone was sharp, brimming with excitement, as if she were discussing a grand plan. I paused in the hallway, not intending to eavesdrop, but her words held me in place. "This house is worth at least $1.5 million, Gloria said, her voice dripping with smugness. "I've already contacted a real estate company. They say the market's hot and we could sell it within a month. That money's enough for us to start fresh somewhere fancier, maybe California. What do you think, Diego, Jenna?" Diego, now an arrogant teenager, let out a loud laugh. Awesome, Mom. I want a house with a pool. And a new car. Jenna chimed in, her voice shrill. I want my own room with an ocean view. Mom, we're gonna be filthy rich. I stood there feeling the blood in my veins boil. This house, the place where I grew up, where my mother once cried, where my father sat at the dining table with a distant look in his eyes, was now being treated like a commodity to fuel their shallow dreams. Memories flooded back, each one like a knife to my heart. My mother dragging her suitcase out the door, Gloria's mocking laughter, my father's cold silence as he did nothing to protect her. This house wasn't just property. It was a testament to the years I fought to survive, to prove I wasn't the outsider Gloria always labeled me. I clenched my fists trying to suppress my anger, but then Gloria said something that made it impossible to stay silent. Victor needs to move out soon, she said coldly. He doesn't belong here. Let him go back to his mother in that rundown little town. This house is ours and he has no say or right to interfere in this decision. I stepped into the living room, no longer able to hold back. Gloria, Diego, and Jenna were gathered around the table, a stack of real estate documents in front of them. They startled at my presence, but Gloria quickly regained her usual haughty demeanor. Victor, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice laced with disdain. You should know your place. I didn't respond immediately. I looked straight into her eyes, forcing my voice to stay calm. I heard you talking about selling the house, I said. Do you think my father left this house to you so you could turn it into cash for vacations and new cars? Gloria scoffed, standing up and crossing her arms. You have no right to say anything here, Victor. The will was clear. This house belongs to me. And if you're smart, you'll pack your things and leave before I have to call someone to throw you out. Diego and Jenna snickered as if this were a game. A sharp pain pierced my chest, but it wasn't hurt. It was rage, a fire I had suppressed for too long. I could have shouted at them, could have revealed the trust fund, the villa, everything my father had truly left me. But I didn't. I just nodded, turned, and walked away, silently vowing that time would deliver their answer. In my heart, a plan began to take shape. I wanted to buy back this house, not for its monetary value, but because it was my father's legacy, the place that held my mother's memories and proof of the years I survived Gloria's coldness and cruelty. This house was part of me, part of my story, and I couldn't let it fall into the hands of people driven only by greed. I wanted to reclaim it, not for revenge, but to protect what was rightfully mine, what my father had wanted me to have. But how could a 20-year-old college student just starting out in life buy a house worth $1.5 million? I knew I had the trust fund, but accessing and using that money wasn't straightforward. I wasn't a real estate expert, nor was I familiar with transactions of this scale. Yet I had something Gloria would never have, the determination and patience my mother had taught me. I started by contacting Mr. Klein, my father's lawyer who had revealed the trust fund. I called him late one evening, sitting in my dorm room under the dim glow of my desk lamp, surrounded by textbooks. Mr. Klein, I want to buy the house in Fargo, I said, my voice trembling with nerves. But I don't want anyone to know it's me. Is that possible? Mr. Klein was silent for a moment before responding, his voice calm but confident. It's possible, Victor. Your trust fund is more than sufficient. But you'll need a third-party company to keep your identity anonymous. I can connect you with someone trustworthy. Mr. Klein introduced me to a small but professional real estate firm in Fargo that specialized in handling sensitive transactions. I met their representative, a middle-aged woman named Susan, via a video call. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. I want to buy the house my father left to my stepmother, I said, but she can't know I'm the buyer. Susan nodded, her eyes sharp but non-judgmental. We can make it happen, she said. We'll use a shell company to place the bid. You just need to provide the funds and sign the necessary documents. But are you sure? This is a big deal and you're young. I took a deep breath, remembering my mother's words. Don't let anyone take what's rightfully yours. I'm sure, I replied. This isn't just a house, it's my legacy. Over the next few days, Susan and her team worked swiftly. I used nearly the entirety of my trust fund to buy the house, about $1.8 million above market value, to ensure the deal went through. Every step of the process kept me awake at night with anxiety. I had to sign a mountain of paperwork, from power of attorney agreements to financial contracts, all sent through secure emails. Susan guided me through each step, explaining everything in simple terms so that I, a college student who had never even bought a used car, could understand. I still remember the night before the deal was finalized, sitting in my room staring out the dorm window. Fargo's city lights twinkled, but a storm of emotions raged inside me. I feared the plan might fail, that Gloria would find out, or that I was doing something wrong. But then I pulled out my father's letter and reread every line. I want you to have a fresh start, he had written, and I knew this was that start. The contract was finalized through a shell company, my identity completely concealed. When Susan called to tell me Gloria had accepted the offer, a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I imagined Gloria, Diego, and Jenna sitting in the living room laughing about the money they were about to receive, oblivious that the buyer was me, the boy they always dismissed as the outsider. That day I stood in the hallway corner listening as Gloria shouted from the living room, "We did it! Now we can start fresh, live like real millionaires." Diego and Jenna cheered, their voices echoing through the house. I stood there quietly, a faint sense of satisfaction creeping into my heart. They thought I was the loser, the abandoned son. But I had learned from my mother that sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon. I returned to my dorm, waiting for the right moment. I knew Gloria would soon demand I move out, and I was ready for that day. I didn't want revenge through shouting or making a scene. I wanted them to feel the consequences of their greed, of the cruelty they had inflicted on me and my mother for years. And I knew that moment was coming, closer than ever. The days following the signing of the house purchase contract were a strange mix of anticipation and calm. Each night I lay on my small dorm bed staring at the ceiling, imagining the moment Gloria would realize the truth. I didn't want to become a bitter person, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of knowing she would soon face the consequences of her actions. I had prepared thoroughly, and now it was just a matter of waiting. The fateful morning arrived on a cold Saturday with light snow falling over the streets of Fargo. I received a text from Gloria, brief and icy as always. "Victor, you need to move your things out this afternoon. The buyer has finalized the paperwork and I don't want you here anymore." I read the message, a surge of electricity coursing through me. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I drove to the Fargo house, my heart pounding but my mind clear. I had everything ready. The documents from the intermediary company, the purchase contract, and my father's letter, which I carried like a talisman. When I stepped inside, Gloria was standing in the living room, arms crossed, a triumphant smile on her lips. Diego and Jenna lounged on the sofa, scrolling through their phones, their faces radiating the same smugness as their mother. On the table was a pile of suitcases and cardboard boxes, my belongings haphazardly packed as if they couldn't wait to get rid of me. "Victor, you're just in time," Gloria said, her voice sweet but dripping with sarcasm. "You have exactly 1 hour to check your things and leave. The buyer wants the house this week and I don't want any trouble." I stood there looking at her, then at Diego and Jenna. They didn't even glance up, as if my presence wasn't worth noticing. I took a deep breath, feeling time slow down. "Gloria," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you say I have to leave, but I think you're mistaken. I'm not the one who needs to go." Gloria frowned, her smile faltering. "What are you talking about, Victor? Don't waste my time. The house has been sold and you have no right to be here." I gave a faint smile, pulling a neatly bound stack of documents from my coat pocket. "You're right, the house has been sold. But do you know who bought it?" I paused, locking eyes with her, letting each word sink in. Me. I'm the buyer. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Gloria's eyes widened, her face shifting from surprise to disbelief, then to anger. Diego looked up from his phone, his mouth agape. Jenna gasped. What, are you joking? Gloria snapped. Don't play stupid games, you don't have the money. A broke college kid like you couldn't possibly afford this house. Pack your things and get out. Don't cause any more trouble or you'll regret it. I didn't flinch, calmly placing the documents on the table and opening to the page of the purchase contract where my name, Victor Chandler, was clearly listed as the new owner. The deal is done, I said, my voice steady but resolute. This house belongs to me now, and I think it's you, Diego and Jenna, who need to pack up and leave. Gloria snatched the documents, flipping through them frantically as if searching for a mistake, a loophole to cling to. But there was none. Everything was legal, executed flawlessly through the intermediary company I had carefully chosen. Her face flushed red, her hands trembling. This can't be, she shouted. You, a kid like you, how could you afford this house? You're lying, this is a scam. I stood my ground unshaken, though my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. There's no scam here, Gloria, I replied. My father left me a trust fund enough to buy this house and more. Did you think he left everything to you? You were wrong. He knew what you'd do with his legacy and he made sure I could take back what's mine. Diego jumped up, pointing at me. Who do you think you are, Victor? You're just your mother's bastard, nothing more. This house belongs to my mom and you have no right to be here. I looked at Diego, now almost as tall as me, but his eyes still childish, full of the arrogance Gloria had nurtured. Diego, I said, my voice low but sharp, you should learn to respect others, especially when you're standing in my house. Jenna started crying, crocodile tears I'd seen too many times before. Victor, can you let us stay here a little longer? She pleaded, her voice trembling. We already have plans, we're moving to California soon. But I felt no pity. They hadn't shown mercy to my mother when she was driven out of this house, and they didn't deserve any from me. Gloria threw the documents onto the table and stepped closer, her eyes blazing. You'll regret this, Victor, she hissed. You think you can take me on? I'll sue you. I'll make sure you're left with nothing. I smiled, not out of joy, but because I knew she had no chance of winning. You can try, I said, but I suggest you review the contract. Everything is legal. And if you want to sue, I have my own lawyer, Mr. Klein, who helped my father set up the trust fund. Do you think you can beat him? Gloria stepped back, her face paling. For the first time in my life, I saw her lose her usual arrogance. She looked small, fragile, like someone who had just realized they'd lost. Diego and Jenna stood there, stunned, unsure of what to do. The air in the room was so heavy I could feel their every breath. You have 3 days to move out, I said, my voice calm but unwavering. After that, I'll call my lawyer and, if necessary, the police. This is my house, and I won't let anyone take it from me again. Gloria said nothing more. She turned, pulling Diego and Jenna into the bedroom, her voice a furious whisper. I stood in the living room looking at my suitcases still strewn messily on the floor. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness. I had done what needed to be done, but why did my heart still feel so heavy? I walked out to the backyard where my mother's old garden still stood, now neglected. I remembered my childhood days planting daisies with her when she taught me how to care for them. Flowers need love to grow, Victor, she had said, just like people. I wondered if I could bring love back to this house, make it a warm place again, the way my mother always wanted. 3 days later, Gloria, Diego, and Jenna left. I wasn't there when they moved out, but a neighbor told me they departed in silence without a single goodbye. I imagined Gloria's face full of resentment and shame and wondered if she ever reflected on what she had done to my mother. To me. When I stepped into the empty house, I felt an odd sense of peace. The house was mine now, not just on paper, but in my heart. I had reclaimed it, not out of greed, but to protect my father's legacy, to preserve my mother's memories, and to prove I was not the outsider they had always thought me to be. I pulled my father's letter from my pocket and read it once more. Live well, Victor. Do what you believe is right. And I knew this was only the first step. Standing in the house that now belonged to me, I felt a strange sense of peace, tinged with a touch of loneliness. The walls were the same, with their pale cream paint and the slightly crooked picture frames my father had once nailed up himself. But the atmosphere had changed. No more of Gloria's triumphant laughter, no more of Diego and Jenna's contemptuous glances. It was just me and the old memories, both painful and warm, waiting to be reawakened. I decided not to stay in Fargo right away. I needed my mother, my grandparents, the people who had always been my anchor in the darkest times. I drove to their small town carrying my father's letter and a newfound determination. When I stepped into their familiar wooden house, the smell of freshly baked cookies and the crackling of the fireplace welcomed me. My mother stood in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, turning to me with a gentle smile. "Victor, you're back," she said, her voice full of love. I hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth I had craved during all those years of Gloria's coldness. I told my mother and grandparents everything, how I had bought back the house the moment I confronted Gloria, and how they left in disgrace. My grandfather, with his snow-white hair and sharp eyes, patted my shoulder. "You did well, Victor," he said. "Not because you beat them, but because you protected what matters." My grandmother took my hand, her eyes glistening with tears. "That house is yours, but don't let it become a burden. Make it a place filled with love the way you were raised." My grandmother's words made me think. The house in Fargo wasn't just property, not just my father's legacy. It was the place where I had watched my mother be humiliated, where I grew up feeling abandoned, but also where I had fleeting moments of happiness. Like when my mother taught me to plant daisies, or when my father, in rare moments, shared stories of his life-saving surgeries. I wanted to turn it into a true home, not just for me, but for the people I loved. I invited my perched mother and grandparents to Fargo. "I want you all there with me," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I want us to take care of the house together, to make it a place we can truly call home." My mother looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, then smiled. "Victor, you've really grown," she said. "I'll come, but only if it's what you truly want. It's your house, and I don't want you to feel you have to do this for me." "I want it," I replied, my voice firm. "I want you there. I want Grandma and Grandpa there. I want us to be a family like we used to be." A few weeks later, my mother and grandparents moved to Fargo. As we stepped into the house, I saw my mother pause in the hallway, the same spot where she had dragged her suitcase out 12 years ago. She touched the doorframe, her eyes welling up, but she didn't cry. "It's still the same," she said softly. "But it's different now, isn't it, Victor?" I nodded, taking her hand. "It's different, Mom. Now it's ours." We began turning the house into a home. My grandfather, despite his age, rolled up his sleeves to help me fix the rotted wooden fence. My grandmother and mother tended to the garden, reviving the neglected daisy beds until they bloomed vibrantly under the spring sun. I found my father's old keepsakes, a pocket watch he cherished, a notebook filled with surgical notes, and a few family photos from when I was young, when my parents were still together. I hung those photos on the wall, not to dwell in the past, but to remind myself that despite the wounds, we were still a family. Those days passed in a peace I had never dared to dream of. I continued my studies, driving back and forth between school and home, but each time I returned, my heart felt lighter. My mother started teaching again at a nearby elementary school, and the spark in her eyes seemed to return. My grandparents, with their endless stories and simple meals, filled the house with laughter. I no longer felt like an outsider. I was Victor Chandler, the one who had reclaimed his legacy not through bitterness, but through love and patience. As time passed, the house in Fargo truly became a home. The months spent living with my mother and grandparents were the most peaceful I had ever known. Each morning I woke to the smell of coffee my mother brewed, my grandfather's muttering about the weather, and my grandmother's gentle gaze as she set a plate of pancakes in front of me. The backyard garden, once neglected under Gloria's reign, now bloomed with daisies, roses, and apple trees my grandfather patiently planted. The house was no longer a painful memory. It was a testament to my family's resilience. But life, as I had learned, always has a way of bringing the past back. One April afternoon, nearly 2 years after Gloria and her children left, the doorbell rang. I was in the garden helping my mother weed, my hands caked with dirt, when I heard it. My mother glanced at me, her brow furrowed, as if she too sensed something unusual. "I'll go check," I said, wiping my hands on my old t-shirt and heading to the door. When I opened it, I froze. Standing before me were Gloria, Diego, and Jenna. They looked nothing like the people I once knew. Gloria, once arrogant with her glossy blonde hair and expensive dresses, now appeared haggard, her hair dull and her eyes sunken. Diego, the once cocky teenager, stood with his head bowed, his shoulders gaunt in a worn-out jacket. Jenna, who had dreamed of ocean view rooms, looked exhausted, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. I stood there, speechless, feeling as if time had rewound to the day they drove my mother out of this house. "Victor," Gloria spoke, her voice trembling, devoid of its former haughtiness. We need to talk. Can we come in?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door to let them face the consequences of their greed and cruelty. But another part, the part my mother had nurtured in me, reminded me that I wasn't like them. I took a deep breath and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said, my voice cool but not harsh. My mother and grandparents appeared in the hallway as we entered the living room. My mother stood tall, her gaze sharp but not vindictive. My grandfather crossed his arms, his expression stern, while my grandmother looked at Gloria with calm composure, as if she had anticipated this day. Gloria, Diego, and Jenna sat on the sofa, looking small and out of place in the room they once claimed as their own. "What's this about, Gloria?" I asked, sitting across from them, keeping my voice steady. My mother stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a quiet reminder that she was always there. Gloria bowed her head, her hands clasped tightly together. "Victor, we're in trouble," she said, her voice choking. "The money from the house, it's gone. We spent too much, trips, cars, clothes. We lost control. Now we're in debt and the bank is about to foreclose on our apartment. We have nowhere else to go." Diego looked up, a flicker of anger in his eyes. "We didn't want to come here," he said, his voice hoarse. "But Mom said you're the only one who can help. You have money, Victor. You have that trust fund, don't you?" Jenna stayed silent, her head lowered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I looked at them, a wave of memories crashing over me. The days I was treated as an outsider. Gloria's mocking words about my mother, Diego, and Jenna's contemptuous glances. I remembered the day my mother dragged her suitcase out when Gloria stood in this very hallway and laughed at her. But I also remembered my mother's words. "Hate only hurts us more." My mother stepped forward, her voice calm but sharp. "Gloria, do you remember the day you kicked me out of this house?" she said, her eyes fixed on the woman who had torn her family apart. "You called me a failure, said I wasn't worthy of Dennis. You thought you'd won, but now here you are begging my son, the boy you called an outsider, to save you." Gloria bowed her head lower, tears dripping onto the floor. "Marcia, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was wrong. I was wrong to treat you and Victor that way. I just wanted a better life for my children." "A better life?" my grandfather interjected, his voice low but powerful. "You built that life on other people's pain. You think an apology is enough?" The air in the room grew heavy, as if every painful memory had come to life. I looked at my mother, seeing the strength in her eyes, and I knew I had to do what was right. Not for Gloria, but for myself, for the values my mother and grandparents had instilled in me. "Gloria," I said, my voice even but resolute, "I'll help you pay off your debts. Not because I forgive you, but because I don't want to become someone like you. I'll give you enough money to start over, but after that, you're on your own. This is my house, my mother's house, my grandparents' house. You have no place here." Gloria looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes, but also deep shame. Diego and Jenna remained silent, their heads bowed, as if they knew they had no right to ask for more. "Thank you, Victor," Gloria said, her voice trembling. I don't deserve your kindness." "You're right, you don't," my mother said, her voice laced with pain. "But Victor isn't like you. He's doing this because he's my son." Gloria, Diego, and Jenna stood and quietly left. I watched them walk out the door, their figures fading into the twilight. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I only felt relief, as if a painful chapter of my life had finally closed. That evening, I sat with my mother and grandparents in the garden under the warm glow of yellow lights. My mother held my hand, smiling. "You've made me proud, Victor," she said. "Not because you took back the house, but because you kept your heart." My grandfather clapped my shoulder, chuckling. "Kid, you're definitely Marcia's son. Stubborn, but with a compassionate heart." My grandmother handed me a cup of hot tea, her eyes gentle. "Now keep tending this garden," she said. "It needs love just like we do." I looked at the garden where the daisies swayed gently in the breeze, and I knew I had found where I belonged. Gloria, Diego, and Jenna may have left in shame, but I didn't need them to feel whole. I had my mother, my grandparents, and this house, a home built on love and resilience. Sitting in that garden under the warm glow of yellow lights, I let my mind drift back to the old days. I remembered 8-year-old Victor huddled on the staircase watching my mother drag her suitcase out while Gloria mocked her. I remembered the long nights in the cold Fargo house, wondering if I truly belonged or if I was just a faint shadow in my father's new family. Those wounds had once cut deep, making me believe I would always be lost. But now, sitting here with my mother and grandparents, I realized I had overcome it all. Not through bitterness, but through patience, compassion, and a fierce belief that I deserved a better life. The house in Fargo now breathed new life. Every corner bore the marks of the moments we created together. My mother and grandmother turned the garden into a lush oasis with vibrant beds of daisies, fragrant lavender, and a small grapevine trellis my grandfather meticulously built. I kept my father's keepsakes, the pocket watch he cherished, the notebook filled with his surgical notes, and the old family photo where my mother and father still smiled beside me. I hung that photo in the living room not to dwell in the past, but to remind myself that despite the pain, we had found a way to heal. Every evening, we gathered around the dining table laughing and sharing stories. My grandfather recounted his days as a carpenter. My grandmother shared recipes passed down from her own grandmother, and my mother talked about her young students at the elementary school. I sat there listening, my heart full. This was my family, not the people who once pushed me to the margins, but those who always opened their arms to me no matter how harsh life had been. I continued my studies, now in my final year of college. The trust fund my father left me not only allowed me to reclaim the house, but also gave me the chance to invest in my future. The beachfront villa in the Outer Banks, which I had yet to visit, was a destination I planned to take my mother and grandparents to for a summer vacation, so they could enjoy the peaceful days they deserved. As for Gloria, Diego, and Jenna, I heard nothing from them after our last encounter. Part of me wondered if they had learned anything from their mistakes, or if they continued to live in greed and selfishness. But I didn't dwell on it for long. They were no longer part of my story. I had given them a chance to start over, and that was the last thing I could do. The rest was their responsibility. My story isn't one of vengeful triumph, of trampling over enemies to feel victorious. It's a story of justice, of reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and of building a life worth living. The house in Fargo, with its blooming garden and the laughter of my mother and grandparents, stands as proof of that. It's not just my father's legacy, but a symbol of my mother's resilience, my grandparents' love, and my belief in myself. One evening, as I watered the garden with my mother, she paused and looked at me with gentle eyes. "Victor, do you know how proud I am of you?" she said. "Not because you took back the house or because you have money, but because you didn't let pain turn you into someone else. You're still my Victor, strong but with a generous heart." I smiled, setting the watering can down and hugging her. "I learned that from you," I said, "and from Dad. He wasn't perfect, but he tried in his own way." My mother nodded, her eyes shimmering under the moonlight. "This house is our home now," she said. "But more importantly, you've made it a place filled with love." I looked out at the garden where the daisies swayed gently despite Fargo's cold breeze. I thought of my father's letter, his apology, and how he quietly prepared a future for me. I thought of my mother, the years she sacrificed in silence, and my grandparents who had always been the light guiding my path. This house, with all its painful and joyful memories, had become a testament to one thing. My father's silent preparations and love, combined with my mother's resilience, had helped me triumph over greed and deceit. I was no longer the lost boy from 12 years ago. I was Victor Chandler, the one who found his family, reclaimed his legacy, and learned that justice doesn't come from revenge but from living true to one's heart. The house in Fargo, with its daisy-filled garden and echoing laughter, would forever be the place I called home.